Hello everyone, I recently made a custom Super Mario Bros. Wonder level called Sugarstar Summit. I started coming up with ideas for this level after making these custom bouncy balloon remodels. These are edits of the triangular trampoline platforms from the original game with a fully custom model and collision that I implemented myself. I also made these platforms that can hang from the balloons and hot air balloons for in the level's background. These took hours upon hours to make, but I don't think discussing the minutiae of how this stuff was created is very fitting for this video, so I might discuss how I make these kinds of custom objects in a future video. There were two mechanics that I felt would fit very well alongside the bouncy balloons. Sugar stars, which would be perfect enemies for this mechanic since they could be made to orbit the balloons, and the P-balloon player transformation wonder effect. The problem is that the balloon transformation doesn't interact with sugar stars. In fact, it barely interacts with anything. It basically can't be killed. However, I also considered that if I'm going to make dozens of custom wonder levels, I'll have to use the balloon transformation eventually, and this was by far the most fitting opportunity. So I decided to bite the bullet and use both mechanics in this level, even though they don't really interact with each other. I also decided to use donut blocks and Koopa Troopers as supplementary mechanics to add some variety to the level, and because I'd already come up with cool bonus rooms using both mechanics. So now it's time to discuss the level creation process. In many ways, this level ended up being a blend of several of the original game's World 4 levels. I used a modified version of the level background that's used in the level Flight of the Blooms. Both the bouncy platforms and those golden pillar semi-solids are prominently featured in Valley Full of Snootles, and I used the P-balloon player transformation, which only appears in Blooms of the Desert Skies. And of course, the bouncy balloons also resemble Blooms in general, which means this level shares a lot in common with one of my own previous custom wonder levels, Sugar Mill Salvo. They're both orange cloud levels that feature bouncy balloon mechanics, not to mention both of their level names also strangely start with the word sugar. But for the most part, this kind of stuff will become unavoidable the more custom wonder levels I make. Not every level in the original game is wholly unique in terms of mechanics, and I still think this level has ended up feeling very distinct regardless. Going into this level, I knew that both the second and third purple 10 coins would feature large or elaborate bonus rooms, so the level's first purple 10 coin is one of the simplest I've put into any of my levels. It's an easy setup where you have to drop down with a donut block to walk under this wave of sugar stars. I think it works. I try to avoid doing this horizontal sugar star wave thing too many times in the level because this is basically the only way in which they were used in the original game Sugar Star level, so I didn't want to be repetitive in that way. I introduced Koopa Paratroopers quite early on in the level, but as you'll see throughout the rest of the level, there are a grand total of 3 Paratroopers across the entire level, which doesn't really fit with how I normally try to keep mechanics consistent. My intention was to introduce Paratroopers early on so I could use them during the Wonder Effect section, but I ended up discovering that the balloon transformation doesn't interact with Paratroopers in the way I thought they did, so I didn't end up including them there at all. Still, I think having so few of them in the level is fine, since they fit well alongside the Sugar Stars, not to mention the normal Koopa Troopers that are used all throughout the level. The idea for the bonus room for the second purple 10 coin was that the player drops down on a large donut platform, triggering Wonder Buds and avoiding Sugar Stars, and this ended up working pretty decently. I did repeatedly redesign this section to try to make it easier, because as it turns out, it's very difficult to react to something that's only appeared on screen half a second ago. This is also why this section ended up being much taller than I thought it needed to be, because I wanted there to be enough reaction time between each set of obstacles. The way the movement of the Sugar Stars works was both a good and a bad thing when it came to ideas I had for this level. See, even though Sugar Stars move around in a circle, this movement is baked into the object, meaning the actor itself isn't moving when this happens. This is useful because it means Sugar Stars can be attached to movement assistants, allowing them to follow moving balloons for example, while still rotating at the same time. However, this also means that I couldn't make other objects, such as coins, follow the movement of the sugar stars, because when doing this, the coins just stay in place because they don't think of the sugar stars rotating as actual movement. Technically, it is possible to remedy this by making a stationary sugar star and then rotating it using a rotation assistant, but this wouldn't trigger the sugar star's usual rotation animations. As you can see, Fushigi, the Super Mario Bros. Wonder level editor, still can't properly display custom models, which is why you're seeing these triangle platforms as opposed to balloons. Though apparently this has nothing to do with Fushigi's rendering, this happens because Switch Toolbox slightly corrupts each Wonder model it saves in a way that doesn't result in any problems in-game, but does cause Fushigi to freak out. My original vision for this level was that it would feature barely any normal terrain at all, and would instead be mostly made up of balloons and platforms hanging from balloons. However, I quickly discovered the problem with this idea when actually starting work on the level, because there are quite a few issues that come with using balloons for walls and ceilings. I didn't like the idea of putting balloons off screen that would block the player from jumping over balloons towards the top of the screen, but having the player be able to skip large parts of the level by jumping on top of every balloon wall they encounter also wouldn't be right, so I ended up not using balloons in this way much at all. Instead, I ended up relying on those golden pillar semi-solids, which meant the level still didn't end up using much solid terrain either way. Just like most of my Wonder levels, this one is pretty unconventional in terms of its overall structure. The checkpoint flag is placed pretty much perfectly in the middle of the level, but because the Wonder effect takes at least a minute or two to complete, the level is quite lopsided. Also, the first two purple 10 coins are quite early in the level, whereas the third one is after the Wonder effect towards the very end of the level. I'm honestly not super happy with how absurdly long the level is. It takes me roughly 7 minutes to beat if I get every collectible, but I also don't know which sections I would cut if I'd want to make the level shorter. The level basically never repeats the same idea twice. I just kept coming up with new things to do with the mechanics. I suppose I could add a second checkpoint just after the Wonder Effect section, but I feel like that would be strange if you skipped the Wonder Effect. Rails, which are used to make things like platforms and coins move, have a pretty cool feature in Super Mario Bros. Wonder where they can teleport an object from the end of a rail back to the start. So I used this quite a bit throughout the second half of the level to make balloon platforms spawn and move in one direction endlessly. As I explained earlier, I couldn't use any sugar stars during the Wonder effect because the balloon transformation doesn't interact with sugar stars at all. It just goes right through them. In fact, the same goes for most enemies, and even obstacles like munches or things that could crush the player. The balloon transformation is basically invincible. So that was a problem when it came to designing the Wonder section, because if the balloon player can't die or take damage, how could I make it challenging? This is why I decided to make a maze section where the player has to collect 5 Wonder tokens to spawn the Wonder Seed, and I also included a timer so the challenge comes from having to find all the tokens before the timer runs out. This meant I could use the balloons not to try to damage the player, but simply to slow them down. So I made a big setup where a bunch of balloons continuously move downwards, and there's several balloons that rotate in a way that resembles how sugar stars move. In fact, all throughout the level I included these rotating coin trails that mimicked the movement of sugar stars, so the inclusion of those in the Wonder section made the lack of sugar stars slightly less troublesome, I think. As you can see, the Wonder section's terrain is mostly made up of these big golden blocks, which were also used for the original game's Balloon Wonder Effect section. Not only does using these blocks look better than if the whole section was encased in normal ground, I think, but another nice thing about these blocks is that they can be spawned and despawned depending on whether the Wonder Effect is active or not. At one point, I was planning on adding loads of those foggy cloud areas to this section that would prevent the player from seeing the balloons, but I didn't end up including too much of that because I realized the player can't easily get rid of the fog whilst transformed because they can't spin jump, obviously. The original game's Balloon Wonder Effect section features a bunch of clouds that get spawned in the background during the Wonder Effect to make the sky slightly less empty, I guess. However, I never really liked how those background clouds didn't have any parallax. They looked as if they were a part of the level environment as opposed to something in the background of the level. So for my section, I included those same clouds, but I put them on a different background layer, meaning they actually have parallax now. Once the Wonder Effect ends, the player gets teleported back to the ground below. I wasn't really a big fan of when the original game would teleport the player after a Wonder Effect has ended, but for this section, using the teleport was sort of inevitable. I could have easily made a section where the player falls back down to the level below from the Wonder Seed, but the problem is that, because of the timer, the Wonder Effect can technically finish anywhere within the section, not just at the seed. I didn't want the player to be able to run around the section, that just wouldn't feel right, so that's why I decided to implement the teleport. The donut blocks that were used throughout the level were something I basically decided to use on a whim just before starting work on the level. They don't really interact with the balloons at all, but I managed to find quite a number of different ways to combine them with sugar stars. So they ended up being a decent way of making sure the level wasn't just balloon section after balloon section over and over again. As opposed to every other Wonder level I've made so far, this level isn't nearly over once the Wonder Effect is finished. There's still roughly a third of the level left after that. There are plenty of levels in the original game where this is the case. For example, Flight of the Blooms, which I mentioned earlier, has its Wonder Effect just before the checkpoint. I do feel like if you've seen most of my levels so far, this might contribute to the level feeling pretty massive by the end, but I imagine once I mess around with the placement of Wonder Effects more in future levels, this won't be the case as much. When starting work on this level, I thought I might struggle to come up with different interesting setups for the sugar stars, but even towards the end here, I was still coming up with new stuff. Just like I described earlier for the moving balloons, it's possible to create an infinite chain of moving sugar stars, which is unlike anything that appears in the original game. This made for a nice way of escalating the difficulty for the finale of the level without having to introduce any crazy new mechanics or whatever. Though speaking of which, this level's difficulty is definitely a bit all over the place. The first half is mostly very easy, then it's impossible to die during the Wonder Effect, and then the last third is so difficult it took me multiple tries to get through it when recording my video showcasing the level. I ended up deciding to give the level a 4-star difficulty rating, but honestly this inconsistent difficulty thing is exactly the kind of stuff that will hopefully get smoothed over if and when the level gets thoroughly playtested by people other than myself. Getting into the pipe for the second bonus room is also kind of laughably difficult. It basically requires an off-screen bounce from a balloon that's about to despawn. It's something I'll likely tweak at a later date. So that leads to the bonus room for the third 10 coin, which may feature one of my most satisfying setups in any of these custom levels I've made. Early on during the level creation process, I noticed how Koopa shells have a really unique interaction with sugar stars. Not only do the shells obviously defeat sugar stars, they also bounce off of them, whereas normally shells continue moving in the same direction after defeating an enemy. So I take advantage of that in this bonus room. The challenge is to throw a Koopa shell so it repeatedly bounces off of a wave of sugar stars so the shell can reach the purple 10 coin. I also added a hidden block to the bonus room that spawns some additional purple coins above the sugar stars. In general, I believe this level has more invisible blocks and coin secrets than any of my previous levels. I kinda went crazy with those, which also contributes to the overall longer playtime. I wasn't really sure what I was going to do for the final section of the level until I remembered that I probably needed some kind of payoff for the donut block mechanic. So I came up with this pretty cool section where 2 waves of sugar stars temporarily block the path of the donut block, meaning it takes a bit of precise timing to get through. After that, all that remained was the setup for the gold ball, which is something that I think really worked out. I finally decided to use a super tall flagpole because that way I could make a staircase made of balloons. Each of these balloons gets lifted up from the bottom of the screen by a Wonder Bud, and 2 of them also have sugar stars orbiting them to escalate the difficulty one last time. You won't see it during this time lapse, but I also ended up adding 3 talking flowers to the 3 balloons that lift up at the end. The ones that say "see you later," which was a perfect fit. I've mostly tried to avoid reusing the same talking flowers I've used in previous levels up to this point, but I decided I probably shouldn't really care about that stuff anymore because the plan is to eventually add custom voice lines to all the talking flowers regardless. And there we go, the level is done, so time to have a look at it in-game. Okay, and here we go. So I introduced the balloons right at the start here. We also have a donut block secret over here. which I suppose it is a bit weird how I don't really introduce the donut block there in a safe way in the way I do the balloons. But I also feel like donut blocks are a very like generic Mario mechanic that most people who are going to play this level will already know. So I don't think it's necessary to really introduce the donut blocks in the same way I introduce the balloons. You can just jump over this, by the way, but I imagine most people probably won't do that, and if you do, then, I mean, it's still a bit precarious doing that, because you have to face these sugar stars over here, and yeah, another nice little coin secret here. Like I talked about during the time-lapse, there are just so many coin secrets and stuff like that in this level, it's kind of crazy. And we got the first purple 10 coin there, which is very simple, but I think it's fine. There's a cool like trailing coin thing there, which sort of resembles the sugar stars, but we can also go up here for a 1-up, and I really like how that 1-up just bounces in place like that. It's really nice how that works. That just sort of worked out. For some reason, 1-ups and other power-ups like that don't have any like horizontal momentum when they hit a bouncy balloon like this, which is yeah, pretty unique, and I take advantage of that a couple of times throughout this level. Then this section is sort of I guess like a micro auto-scroller almost. Though actually this balloon here will move back to the left if you wait for it to go. So therefore you're not stuck if you don't get on the balloon the first try. And we can go in here and into this pipe, which leads to the bonus room for the second purple 10 coin. There's actually a hidden block over here with a bunch of coins like this, which I didn't show during the showcase video because I felt like that would take a lot of time, and the level is already ridiculously long. Then I really like hitting these wonder buds like this. Doing that with the fire flower is very convenient, and it makes this room a lot easier to get through. There's also a hidden block over here because, yeah, there are just loads of mini coin secrets throughout this level. But I think that works. And now we're back in the main section. We can get another power-up over here. I try to put a bunch of power-ups in the level to make things a bit easier in that way. Though obviously the number one threat throughout the level really is falling into pits, which won't be helped by a fire flower. We can get some more coins over here, once again using the bouncy attribute of the bouncy balloons, which somehow interacts with basically everything. Then we can also spawn another coin secret here. God, there are just so many of those. Though I do like how I managed to like sort of do things in a different way for basically every coin secret. Like we had that smaller balloon lift up there. Or here we have another one of these, yeah, there we go, I hit it with the shell. Another one of these sort of circling coin things, which obviously, like I talked about, resembles the sugar stars. This like vertical sugar star wave thing is something I was originally planning on having a lot more of throughout the level, but I realized that there really isn't much like functional difference between that and just like a single sugar star. It just looks a bit cooler and different, I guess. And yeah, there we go. I haven't actually tested whether that setup works with, like, in multiplayer or anything like that. Like, if that actually works with multiple power-ups. I imagine it probably won't, but honestly, who cares? I suppose this is another sort of auto-scroller section, like the previous moving big balloons. And this one's also a bit more tricky to get through with some of the sugar stars up there, though for the most part I've been able to manage. And we can go up here for the wonder flower. If we hit this wonder bud, I made that one extra slow, so therefore you can sort of follow it, and that spawns the wonder flower. So here we go. Yeah, so I used the balloon wonder effect, and like I talked about during the time lapse, it is one of the most like limited wonder effects you can use, weirdly, even though it's obviously quite freeing in terms of movement because you can just float around. It really, like, there's just very little that interacts with this, so I didn't really have an amazing like grand idea for this to like combine it with other elements. It basically just turned out that I made this sort of big maze thing out of balloons. You can go in multiple different directions. I chose to go over here because I feel like this is the most efficient route, though as I'm saying this I'm also sort of struggling to get through this. We got the first wonder token there. Oh, that kind of glitched out. We got the first wonder token there from this this infinite chain of downward going balloons, and that will also respawn if you don't get it on the first wave, basically. Then up here you can see another wonder token up there, and I like the idea of having the player sort of wonder like, oh, how do I get that? And then you can go up here, and the camera sort of reveals this extra section over here. I also have the talking flower here, which is in the original game. Yeah, that's used for the what are they called? The puffy lifts, but I felt like it was also fitting for the balloon transformation. Then these mini coins here are actually to indicate that this is where the the Wonder Seed spawns once we get all of the tokens, though that is a bit difficult to do. Here we go. This just moves that block out of the way. There are just a bunch of different moving things in this section to try and make it feel a bit more dynamic and interesting, even though I can totally see how, like, this section might be perceived as a bit boring and kind of long and stuff compared to some of the other Wonder sections I've made in some of my recent levels. But honestly, I really don't know what else I could have done with the balloon transformation here. I feel like it really is, yeah, just extremely limited. So for the most part, I'm pretty happy with how this this section turned out. I think it's okay. I also made all of this in like a single day, in like a single level creation session. So that really was quite something to get through. Also, actually, I didn't show this during the original level showcase, but we can go back up here, and there's this talking flower that says this, which I feel like is very appropriate, and just a funny little Easter egg. I didn't show that during the level showcase video because I feel like it's a bit difficult to get back down here from that section, because the camera isn't very cooperative, so therefore I didn't think that that would be nice to show, but it's just a funny little Easter egg, basically. Then these blocks here actually give the player a mushroom if you don't have any power up, but because I already have the fire flower, I don't get anything, which is fine. And now we have these epic vertical sugar stars, which, as you can see, those don't have the same like sort of like light effect as the normal sugar stars, like right here. That sort of like transparent line, they don't have that because those are obviously like sort of janky rail movement assistant sugar stars, as opposed to something that's actually official and something that appears in the original game. But I still think it looks good enough. And then this talking flower here sort of hints at the fact that this section is kind of ridiculous. We can go down here and into this pipe, which yeah, it's kind of janky and kind of crazy, but I guess it's fine. And then we can use the shell here for this secret. Oh yeah, that works. And we can also get these coins to spawn, which allows us to get even more from this same sort of setup. I did consider making this a lot more elaborate, having like multiple, oh I messed that up, having like multiple like sort of levels of this this same sort of setup and having like it sort of taught to the player, but I realized that like this section alone is already impressive, and also the level is extremely long, so I didn't want the I didn't want that to be another contributing factor to the level's overall ridiculous length. So instead we have this sort of final gauntlet of the different mechanics here. I felt like I needed something a little bit extra with the vertical sugar stars, so that's why I came up with this section here. And then that also nicely led into, oh, can I get this? There we go. Nicely led into this final section with the donut blocks here, just to sort of have a finale to that mechanic. And yeah, now all that's left is this this goal pole setup here. So the first balloon doesn't have any sugar stars, and the second balloon has these two green guys, which are kind of slow. Also, that fireball went crazy there, and then we have this this smaller setup right here. And oh well, that's fine. And yeah, that's the end of this video, guys. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and consider subscribing and whatever. I also have a Discord server, and you can sign up for channel memberships and that kind of stuff. But thank you guys so much for watching. See you later, and bye-bye.